Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. This is not an audience that I've spoken to before, so I'm excited to be here. Let me just give you a quick idea of what I'd like to talk to you about today, and I hope I can share some practical ideas of what's going on as we try to reshape the organization of the future with digital. So, as Kinthi said, we're a management consulting company, and we've got the privilege of working with the Global 500 on their digital strategies. And in particular, what we try to do is to enable the worker and make sure that we use technology as a means to pull people, to the new work in the future state. So, as you can imagine, and I've seen just a little bit of your dialogue today. Unfortunately, I wasn't here yesterday, but I get a sense that ideas of culture and organization change and how do we get from here to there seems top of mind to you as well. And our clients are typically the heads of HR, folks that are involved in organization redesign, the business leads, head of ops, and not too much R&D, but I will give you a sense of how I think we overlap with the methodologies of R&D later on in the presentation. So I need to stop for beginning and at least set some groundwork, if I can, with you on how we think about digital transformation inside the enterprise, and then to talk about some of these challenges of building the digital organization. And again, I kind of hear an appetite for practical solutions, so I'll try to weave some of that into my discussion if I can. I always have more information than I have time, so I do it all the time. So I'm going to try to stick to my script a bit so I can get through the content at the beginning, because I have some examples of digital design I want to share at the end, real design running at real companies and how they're trying to use digital as a catalyst for change. So let me give that a run. I will say that I'm not the pacer that Victor is. So I'm going to probably stand a little bit more over here to pace too much. So in any case, so the agenda is a quick discussion about the fourth industrial revolution. I'm a big person on context. It really needs to make sense to me on, why somebody is asking me to change, to do something differently. And I think this is a challenge with workers, is to create context for them. I don't think that, a changing ecosystem eludes them. So we'll talk about that just a little bit. I'll tell you what our experience is in terms of real challenges that organizations have. And then, as I said, I'll end with a digital employee experience, and hopefully I can share some interesting ideas with you there. As I'm sure you all know, but this really starts the whole story for me is, oops, hold on, I dropped my glasses. Well, you know what, I don't think I need them. Just remind me to get it before I go. The digital transformation that our clients are seeing is entirely explainable by just contextualizing it to the fourth industrial revolution. And the fourth industrial revolution is clearly upon us, even though it's in an early stage. As you know, I hope you know, the revolution observes the tremendous, nearly perfect storm of digital capabilities combining with human behavior that together are really changing everything around us. Now, more than ever before, technology shapes our behavior, and our behavior shapes technology. Digital transformation is the fourth industrial revolution. It's the byproduct of the fourth industrial revolution. And that means essentially it's the fusion of these technologies, physical, digital, biological, that are changing everything around us, our roles in society, our relationships with technology, even policy, government, etc. You know that what makes this revolution so fascinating is its size and momentum and its reach. It's really unlike any prior industrial revolution that we've experienced before. People themselves juice the impact of this revolution with the prospect of billions with access, usually through mobile devices, with unlimited storage, processing power, and unfettered access to knowledge. add technology breakthroughs and some of the things that you see on my slide, 3D printing, AI, machine thinking, et cetera, and it multiplies the effect. It's like a perfect storm. And the fourth industrial revolution is upon us, clearly. It will certainly challenge us. Those are the discussions you're having today. And hopefully it will benefit us. Certainly it will forever change us. See, I don't pay attention enough to my slides. You can see the disruption in all industries. Historically, unrelated industries are converging. Definitions of supply and demand systems are changing as technology-enabled platforms disrupt legacy industry structures. Digital lowers the barrier to entry in all areas, marketing, R&D, production, delivery, while creating new wealth and new valuation models. An interesting way to observe this, just one of many, many ways to observe it, is to see it as the changes in global flows of goods and services and finance. And relatedly, in this chart, the number of data connections, global data connections in the global network of flows. In the next decade, global flows could be tripled, powered by prosperity, participation in the emerging world, and the spread of digital technologies. So there is just no end to what digital disruption is touching. To be successful then in the digital age, enterprises need to rethink a lot more than just their technology. I really think this goes a bit to one of the polls that you did earlier today about how innovative is CIO technology inside the organization. I think the answer is not very. I think that's true. Digital business and operating models that are driven by digitally wise, I'm going to say digitally wise instead of digitally native or digitally competent leadership, digitally wise leadership are fundamental in this new model. And building the digital workforce that's needed now or soon is critical. And this is complicated by factors well beyond the shortage of digital talent, although that's clearly a problem. Culture, the thing that I've heard you talk about all day, and I'll talk about that today, try to give you some practical ideas on that. Culture is often the thing that organizations don't want to talk about publicly. There's no public company that wants to stand up as a multinational and point to major problems with their culture, because when we say that to employees, we are in effect saying it to the public. So we've got organizations that at the best might describe what they need to do with culture as saying things like, we need to be the best. You can see it's not very helpful. So how do we move these organizations from their earlier models that we built? We built these models based on corporate stewardship, risk aversion, and compliance to where they need to be going forward, responsive organizations based on horizontal, not vertical context. I said earlier that, I like context as gluey ideas, to concepts, and I'd like to leave you with, if nothing else, this idea of focus on the horizontals, not on the verticals, because that really is where we have commonality across the organization. And if you think about these from and to ideas on this chart, they really are from ideas of verticals to two ideas of horizontals. So, for example, horizontals such as connectivity and networking rather than hierarchies, empowerment of people and teams in lieu of command and control, outcomes of engagement and intrinsic motivation without the promise of structured career paths or time-earned rewards. And finally, how do we motivate workers to aggressively pursue and help us even define their new relationships with machines when those machines could well be poised to replace them in part or in whole in the future? It's a challenge. It's no surprise, nor do I think that most companies would deny, that digitalization in the marketplace is ahead of digitalization inside the enterprise. At best, in my experience, companies simultaneously looked over their shoulder at the workplace and deprioritized the value of digital needed there. we're starting to see the effect of that, the shearing of the business model that happens when external digital strategy is not supported with ready people, practices, and digital capabilities internally. We're also realizing that changing the work environment is much more complex and difficult than we initially thought, with unique challenges here that we don't find in dealing with our customers in the workplace. For example, productivity, for example, performance. It's a different, in some ways, yet same discussion. So I would start by saying that minimally, we need to give higher priority to building the digital organizations if companies are to reach their digitalization goals broadly. Philosophically and operationally, it's important to see the yin and yang of these ideas. Companies need to plan for digital progress and maturity along both paths, attempting to move each in reasonable proximity to the other. We should expect today that there's likely catch-up work to do in the workplace. In doing so, we see that marketplace goals have a related internal context. Growth in the marketplace requires a growth mindset in the workplace. Customer centricity in the marketplace requires people centricity in the workplace. And innovative, competitive solutions in the marketplace require a sustainable culture, in my opinion, culture, not organization, of innovation in the workplace, and so on. As we focus on the digital organization, what have we learned so far that would help us moving forward with our digital strategies and goals? For sure, we've found that digital transformation is less about digital and more about transformation. And transformation obstacles are organizational in nature. Ironically, companies acknowledge this, as you see in this HBR survey, but the organizational ability to focus and act on these organizational dimensions is not yet strong. I would contend it's not that businesses don't know, they just don't know what to do about it. If we examined this a bit closer, we could at least have a dialogue on these four important dimensions: leadership, organizational capabilities, which I really haven't heard you talk a lot about today, so I want to introduce that concept to you. I think you'll find it useful. A mechanism for organizational agility, and finally, the right culture. I want to describe them first, and then I'll come back and talk about ways of thinking about them. Virtually all organizational and change practitioners would acknowledge... Oops, can you come back for me, hon? I can only go forward, isn't that weird? Okay. Virtually all organizational and change practitioners would start with leadership as the most essential driver of change. Leadership hesitancy, in our opinion, stems from a few things. First, a lack of financially driven urgency. And I think this plays a bit to some of the things that you've been talking about, around performance metrics or goals. But I see it in dealing with very senior people. I see it as unclear performance or productivity metrics that can be used in a business case. Because we can't measure things to improve them if we can't start them. We need business cases to get things started. So the question is, how do we create enough metrics to show the line of sight of creating digital capabilities inside the organization relative to business performance in the long run? And those are the dots that we're trying to connect. So financially driven, a lack of financially driven urgency contributed by a lack of meaningful business cases. Great discomfort with the digital technology itself. And 3, a classical lack of approach to organizational design methodologies that bridge the organizational silos. Organizational silos and being able to overcome silos, in my strong opinion, is the biggest impediment to the organization moving together on common issues. Any common issues. organizational capabilities, culture, so on and so forth. I think it's really important that we try to name this idea of there's a lack of methodology for collaboration across the business units and functions in big companies. There's literally a lack of methodology. And if everybody reports up to the CEO that we're talking about here, we're talking about inter-organizational interoperability practices that don't exist. I find it much more a matter of process than a matter of motivation, generally speaking. So the way that we deal with that, or one of the ways that we deal with that as an organization, is we try to create enterprise common context. Can I give you that idea? Enterprise common context. What are the things that senior people can agree to across the organization, and then we can rally behind in terms of making them actionable? Enterprise common context that lead to action. Culture's got to be actionable. We've got to get all of this into action. The question is how we do it. So when we work with business leaders and business units that have, from their perspective, nothing in common, and sometimes they're very similar, and it's amazing that they think they have nothing in common, but they really don't see themselves aligned at all. They've got their own P&Ls, they've got their own staff, they've got their strategies, and they're marching, and they get rewarded for that, obviously. So the way that we try to find common with them is to talk about common organizational capabilities. It's a horizontal idea. What are the things that all of them need? They all need a ready workforce. They all need more digital leadership in the organization. They all need connectivity across the workforce. They all need innovation. So how can we establish a set of prioritized organizational capabilities that business leaders and functions can agree to, and that becomes a tenet of their digital strategies going forward? I think it's a very big idea, and if we can get people to at least give us that as it's a building block, we can start seeing culture in action, because some of the cultural changes that we're trying to instill can be seen through the lack of organizational capabilities that aren't in the business today. Can you see that line of sight? Okay, so I want to build on that a little bit as we go forward. The last two challenges of organizational agility and cultural complacency are closely related. Culture is very commonly highlighted as a critical challenge for any form of change. As I said before, a big dominant idea in your discussions. However, as we'll discuss in a bit more depth as I go through my presentation, is that culture must be tied to an organizational mechanic and to an organizational design. And that is essentially the work of people. And it's this language that you'll hear me use again and again. How do we make culture actionable? And if you use the organizational capabilities model that I showed you a moment ago, I would say like this: culture equals a set of organizational capabilities that we're trying to develop and build, and then we can look at those organizational capabilities and ask the question, what behaviors are needed for those capabilities to be enacted in the organization? So the line of sight of culture to capabilities to behaviors is where we start trying to say, how can we get these ideas of culture actionable? It's a lot easier to think about how we support and encourage behavioral ideas. And I think executives understand organizational capabilities and behavioral ideas a lot more than they might understand soft language around moving culture. Do you see what I mean? You've got to break it down into things that kind of make sense. Legacy companies, as opposed to digitally native companies, have historically been slow to change. And when they do, that change is incremental and discrete. That is, it's a big change. It's implemented all at once. Things are allowed to settle down, find some normalcy, and they could be sitting there for years. In the digital world, as you know, change is continuous. Therefore, organizations must be trained to be agile. That's why we say that. That's why we say organizations need to be agile, because we see this idea of agility and adaptability as not having a start and end. Sorry, I didn't keep up with myself. This is a good slide, I think, about how to start decomposing culture. Cultural levers, as you know, are a top-line challenge. And here we try to show the relationship of from and to. I know that this is almost a seemingly overly simple exercise, but I have to tell you that, in almost every digital strategy engagement that we do with the Fortune 200 today, we use some version of this protocol. Where is the organization today culturally, and where do they want to be or need to be tomorrow? And if you can get executives to buy into this idea of a from and to idea, they're very clear about where they need to go. It doesn't elude them as a concept. They just hear it in certain language or ideas about how they observe the organization today to how they think they need to observe the organization tomorrow. So often we get to these discussions about common organizational capabilities needed by starting with this from and to idea. What must you do to move this organization from a culture of what to a culture of what? Now, if that's true, what organizational capabilities are implied with that move? Do you see what I mean? As you try to put a bit of a structure or a protocol around the discussion of culture. I have to tell you honestly, I don't really know many executives, CEOs, and their C-level staff that want to have an adjective-based discussion of culture. I just think it's asking a lot more than what people, really have the time or interest in doing. Okay, so let me just see if I can observe that a bit more pragmatically for you, and then I want to show you some examples. Is everybody with me so far? Making sense? Okay, I feel bad about the people back in the left-hand corner. I can barely see you guys. Okay, so what is the digital organization, really our focus as a business? Let me pull apart some of the pieces I mentioned before. Whereas agility is an observable characteristic, dexterity is an active skill. It's a better word for a methodology of change. It's about a particular capability to shape an organization specifically, explicitly, and quickly. This is the idea of a continuous system of change and adoption. Similar to our discussion a moment ago about the top-line things that we need to think about as we define the digital organization, these are some of the things that we can focus on as we're trying to create change levers for the digital organization, the list on the left. And I'll just talk about each one of these briefly, and I promise I'll get into my examples so you can see them playing out. A digital-first mindset, I think we all use this language, but this needs to be a direct connection of cultural attributes and the actions that people take. These actions range from collective, systematic, organizational planning to individual attitudes. A digital-first mindset is an organizational way of being, of prioritizing, and of talking about the markets that we play in and our response to them, the company's response to them. A digital-first mindset impacts virtually every element of business activity. Alignment to management systems. I didn't hear this discussion again today yet so far, so let me give you this and see if you find it helpful. We found that a powerful way to change organizations, starting with this idea of agreeing to priority organizational capabilities, is to look at better alignment of the enterprise management systems in place at the organizations today. I have to be honest with you. It's the reason that I'm here today. It's the reason that I accepted Kinthy's invitation to come because, as I said, this is not an organization or a forum that we would typically go to. However, what we're finding in our work is that after we work with the business units and leaders to understand common organizational capabilities needed, we need to look at all the organizations, HR and what they're doing, the CIO and their methodology of agile, the CIO or whomever might be doing design thinking inside the organization. I have a lot of thoughts on design thinking in the organization, the COO and their changing practices of lean. And now for us, R&D and the practices and methodologies that R&D is trying to bring to the table, in order to change the organization and their innovation approaches. We find, in my very strong opinion, these are the new organizational silos. These organizations are the new organizations that are not collaborating in order to implement change across the organization. So when we get involved in businesses and we pull together all the business unit leaders to try to get agreement on organizational capabilities that they're trying to build, we also say, who are the people with methodologies or responsibility for change within this organization? And it changes, just so you know, dramatically from company to company. You might see some similarities in vertical market, but it's not reliable. There'll even be high variability in the same vertical market. So then you have to name people. The CIO and Agile, just so you know, that's always a yes. Design thinking, sometimes in the CIO, sometimes someplace else, sometimes in multiple organizations, each kind of doing their own interpretive idea of that methodology. Increasingly, the CSO organizations are bringing in change people of their own with very different methodologies, just so you know, very different methodologies. So, as I like to say, there's one business strategy and one worker. You see? One business strategy and one worker, and all the problems sit in the middle. All the problems sit in the middle from a worker's perspective of how do we get that worker, that team, that manager, that leader to behave in alignment with the rest of the organization. And I strongly think that one of the things we have to do is to align, at least get people who run the change-based methodologies to have a discussion so we can all agree to what we're all going to throw at these poor people in terms of practices and expectations and rewards programs, for God's sake, performance programs, so on and so forth, that don't naturally align. Where do all those organizations come together? If they don't come together in methodology and they don't come together in practice and they don't come together organizationally, how do we know that we're asking people to do the same set of behaviors under the same or similar circumstances? Do you see what I mean? So I'm not saying it's going to be a hand-in-glove idea that we're going to get lean digital to align to agile. We can't even get agile to align to design thinking, let's be honest. You know what I mean? And they're at least closely related as a systems lifecycle methodology, so how are we going to get these other methodologies to line up? But we have got to at least agree where we are with people. If you think that we're in an awareness stage of change, and I think I'm in a reinforcement level of change, you see how we're going to be crossing each other in the middle of the night, with no cohesive way of going out to people. At the end of the day, it really is the one worker that we're looking to change. Who else would it be? So it just doesn't make sense. We've got to get our change methodologies to work together. I call those the enterprise horizontals, the management systems, you call them what you want, but I think that you would see that they really, are operating under minimally different methodologies, of course, but in many cases under a different set of goals. Digital work practices. See, I think that this is what sits between business strategy and what a lot of our clients try to put design thinking against. Here's the problem with design thinking. I know people disagree with me, I'm going to say it anyways. The problem with design thinking is that it doesn't explicitly take on the idea of redesigning work. Redesigning work. So what sits between business strategy and people as an idea is the business being redesigned, work being redesigned. You hear the difference? Work being redesigned, and then the experiences that people use. And because we're not designing in a consumer space, I'm sorry, you're not talking to people in a mall. Because we're not designing in a consumer space, we've got to make sure that we understand the business's interests in productivity and performance too. So it's not just what people want. Inside the enterprise, it's not just what people want. It's what the business needs and what people want or are willing to do. We try to find the marriage of those ideas so that we can find things like productivity, performance, careers in the future state, whatever your objectives are. Do you see what I mean? So not having work design and being explicit about the relationship of new work, because the work is changing, it should be changing. I'm going to show you an example of how we redesign work so you get what I mean. And then the behaviors that we expect of people, and where those two things meet are work practices. And if we're going to design for people, we need to design their work and help them design their future work, not design thinking based on what they want alone. Design thinking based on how the organization's really going to function in the future state. Does that make sense when I say it like that? Yeah? Are you guys with me back there? Okay, good. I love it when someone gives me like, yes, I'm with you, or no, say something. Okay. So, I mean, you've seen a lot of these charts. You know, I like to use this language of the fusion of humans and machines in the future state. This really is our background from an LDS perspective. It's my background, and that is, how do we think about, you know, what we used to describe as the relationship as almost an input-output idea. You know, what do people give machines? What do machines give people? You know, and we would flow this out in this A-B, 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 you know, kind of model. But now we put those two things together, and what we're really seeing is this codependency, this commingling of the relationship of humans to machines. And that's very much something that we need to focus on as we design the future state. You know, it's weird that we talk about only one technology, right, as we think about people's solutions going forward. You know, respectfully, drones as a standalone idea, or data as a standalone idea, as a technology, when really it's the converging of a lot of these technologies that you wouldn't even really see them separately, you know, with the work of people that we're trying to achieve as we design the organizations in the future state. Does that make sense when I say it like that? Yeah? Okay. So, oops. I want to go on to my examples here. I want to leave you with this one thought of evolution, then I'm going to show you some case studies. Companies don't become digital overnight. Cultures don't change overnight. You could say the same thing. I love the idea of digital moments. Let's help people put one foot in front of the other and start walking towards the organizations of the future by modeling experiences that start representing where we want people to go in the future. How do we instill culture? Make it real. How do we instill culture? Let people enact it. Let people enact it in order to try to understand what the future state looks like. People are not motivated. They're just uncertain. You know, they're not unclear about what's going on in the business. They're unclear about what you want them to do and how you want them to do it. So the more that we can enact the future state and use technology to pull people to a place that they aren't today, the more we start seeing actionable ideas of change. From my perspective, where most corporations are right now is they're exiting this early stage of digital that's defined by technology, digital defined by what the CIO is buying and bringing inside the organization, where we are with our digital set of tools. And I think digitalization from a technology perspective, you know, just gives us a warehouse of tools and people with no context of what to do with them to really do something powerful with them. If you think that's not true, look at all of the initial launchings of social tools that we did inside the enterprise, you know, that were used for sharing cooking recipes, sports scores, etc. People didn't know what to do because we didn't contextualize good uses of them and model them. So we're moving from technology-driven digital to business-driven digital, and that's a good idea. Business stepping in and trying to contextualize technology for us. But where we really need to go is to strategy-driven digital, and that's the CIO down across the organization, all agreeing to the capabilities that we need to develop, and then making steps towards developing them. Okay, so let me share some examples, see what you think. I'm checking my time. I have two examples that I want to share with you. They're really very different. I have time. I've got a little video at the end I'll play. So this is designing digital experiences, and it's all about the employee experience and trying to bridge this gap between business strategy and experience design. So in this case study, we had to design new work of first responders. So how do we use aerial technology, artificial intelligence, and digital capabilities to try to redesign the work of first responders? And we did it in two cases. We did it in humanitarian relief, and we also did it in infrastructure surveillance. Companies that needed to look at infrastructure after different disasters, assess them, and then decide how to respond to them. So connecting the dots, if you will, between the employee experience and the business strategy. We need to look holistically at the employee experience, making sure that we understand all factors that go into the experience: environmental, cultural, design, work practices, to make sure that we're clear about all the factors that we're trying to change as we think about the holistic employee experience. And then finally, we need to look at things from a person's perspective. What is digital doing for me? How does digital attach to me, and make it easy for me to adopt digital, because the advantages of it are just so darn obvious. The closer that we can get digital to just being useful to people, the more we'll start seeing some of these cultural behaviors change. So what did it look like? So we're changing the nature of work for first responders. The technology that we were using to do that was aerial technology. That means planes, drones, manned, unmanned ideas for surveillance. And then an artificial intelligence engine that made decisions that were otherwise made by people before. First responders who were engaged throughout, helped us identify new solutions to old problems. They gave us a lot of these ideas, and in the process, they found professional growth themselves. So what did it look like? By the way, these were done in pilots in both of the examples that I told you about. So planes and drones, as you can see, were dispatched to disaster sites immediately following a disaster, getting into these areas much quicker than we could have deployed people, when roads were unpassable, or when we just simply couldn't cover the mileage that needed to be covered, just the geographic area, in order to do surveillance. The AI engine was developed before the disaster, of course, and its job was to take the surveillance maps that were shot by the drones or aerial technology and begin to try to diagnose what the incidents were. So what is that? It's a downed tree. It's a downed tree on a power line. It's a downed tree on a house. There appears or doesn't appear to be people involved. So the concept is send out these planes or drones initially, have an initial set of incidents come back, diagnose those not only by location but by type, and start to reason through the kinds of services that might be needed. A down power line needs this. A person that could be injured needs that. So resources against that all went into the AI engine for initial diagnosis. The experience that we designed, which you're seeing here, anything that you see is a screen capture, desktop or mobile, or all the experience work that we did. The experience then supports two main user roles. The first is first responders. The second is their project managers. So the experience enables workers to view, incidents within a geographic area that they're assigned in. Now, I will tell you, when we initially designed this was interesting. Not enough work design was done. We had the project managers decide what tasks got sent to which first responders, because that's what they did today. Today, on a manual basis, the PM's job was to get the tasks out and assigned to people. What we found is that because the first responders could see that data as quickly as the PMs could see it, the first responders could pull the task down. They could say things like, I can do that, I can take that, I'm right near that, I have the tools for that on my truck, or I don't have the tools. So it was like part of this work redesign, so fun to learn it, that we realized that we could really redefine the role of project managers and not make them be the people that were assigning tasks, but rather let project managers step back and manage the incidents at a macro level among the different PMs, because there's multiple PMs and then teams that sit inside and report to each one of the PMs. So redesign the work. We also found that this idea of being able to send drones out on demand, that the worker could release the drone request. See, that's also something that we didn't figure out the first time. Initially, we said PMs could redispatch the aerial technology, but what we realized is the people that could make that call faster were the people that were on the ground. So again, redesign the work, redesign the experience, and in the process, you can see these digital moments that I was talking about. I don't think that any of the first responders were saying, am I using digital now? Am I using digital? Am I partnering with my digital counterpart appropriately now? I just don't think people were asking that. They were saying, could you do this? Could you do that? Could you help us improve this? And then afterwards, as you can see, the teams relied on the incidents. The teams feed information back to the AI engine. The AI engine gets smarter, so it gets useful the next time. PMs can add intelligence, as well as the first responders on the ground. Not only did the drones take pictures, this was another change that we made, but workers could take pictures because the aerial technology could only get so low on the ground. So a much more local, photo of what was going on turned out to be really useful. So then we enabled first responders to take and upload photos. We dealt with a lot of issues like what happens when first responders don't have connectivity. They get out of range, especially in the middle of a disaster. So we had to come up with things like docking stations inside the hubs so that they could download information, go out, come back, upload their information, et cetera, if they lost connectivity at any point. But nevertheless, you see the idea, like I could talk about this as new work before I'd talk about it as culture, before I would talk about it as design thinking or an experience design itself. I could stay in this new work and productivity discussion all day. And you can see how it's just the little microcosm of the culture that we're trying to instill: empowerment, accountability, people stepping up, partnering in virtual teams, working seamlessly with digital, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a big postmortem afterwards, and we're all committed to improving the AI engine so that the next time, we send people out, we send them out a little smarter than we did the last time. Does that make sense? So that was fun. Thank you so much. And here's my last one. I hope that this is helpful to you. I again, didn't have the conversation before I came down, but designing for culture, how do we shape culture? And so we think, I would say, one of the ways that we shape culture is to enact it for people, show people practical applications of culture. So I had to scrub this, but I brought this. I thought you might find it interesting. We worked with a very large financial services firm, 200,000 plus employees globally. They didn't want to talk about their culture. They wanted us to create an employee experience strategy and design that would really resonate and draw people into the future state. We said, got to talk about culture. So how do we talk about it from this from and to model, and how do we make culture actionable? And this is a logical model that we developed with them, in order to try to show them how we could act on culture. So working with their business strategy at the top and creating this concept of culture as actionable, there was a lot of language in the organization around creating a growth mindset, so we started decomposing what that meant. But we came up with these 3 dimensions of making culture actionable: how to get culture into people's situations that are common, how to get culture into concepts. This is such a good idea, culture in concepts like leadership moments. What's a leadership moment? Concepts like empathy. And then how do we get concepts into initiatives How do we get culture into initiatives where initiatives have an awareness problem? People aren't aware of some of the things that you're trying to get them to behave on. Culture of health. No one walks around saying, I guess I need to be a part of culture of health. Culture of health, culture of inclusion. So these are the things that we say we need to make explicit. And then we designed for it. So this is all part of the employee experience design. Taking ideas that are otherwise commitments. Okay, this is like the perfect analogy. You need to move culture as commitments to culture as action. So we took the commitments of the organization. You own your career. Hang your personal shingle here, meaning network with other people. Make sure you grow through innovation, continuous learning, so on and so forth. And we built that into the experience design and connected the dots on exactly how people could do that. So that went to a set of learning and courses and programs and affinity groups, all things that I could do to act on those concepts. Inspire participation, participation in different cultural groups within the organization. Inspire participation in people's own development. Again, designing experiences that are explicit about the culture that we want people to adopt. Culture of continuous learning and how we develop continual learning behaviors within the organization. Build it into the experiences so that performance and development don't look like a cyclical process I have to go through, but rather they look like a development process I want to go through. Demonstrate the value of journeys. We talk about value of journeys or journeys as a design idea, but people don't think about it as a journey. So demonstrate the value of journeys. What's it like to work other places? How do I consider opportunities for growth in other parts of the business or the world that I wasn't considering before? How do I make sure that I even consider those as mine? And so on and so forth. I'm just about out of time. I do want to say this one thing I think you'll find interesting. We worked with a company when we were working on their innovation and knowledge sharing practice, and this is part of the solution that we developed for them. And they had this great saying when we showed up. They said, if only our organization knew what our organization knows. That's a how do we make it explicit idea. I love that. They had the company name in which I can't show you. But you see, so designing for cultural change, designing so people see their brand inside the brand of the organization, designing for engagement, are all things that, we try to do to make culture explicit. So I'm going to stop there. We've got a little video. We'll show it out of our booth if you want to come out and look at it later. And if you have questions for us, we'll try to catch up with you there. Thanks for being patient on my my time. She's like, get out of there.
No. Well, I think we're really lucky because you and your team, you have the table outside, and you're here for the rest of the day?
I'm here just for a couple of hours.
And we've got your whole
team
out there. So I think if you have more questions for Mimi and her team, find them during lunch and find them at the table.
Exactly. Right? Thanks for your time. Good luck. Have fun. Yeah.